Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, third part there for the 22nd of November 2024. This is a geopolitical update, quite a few bits to get through. We're going to start with Russia in itself and rather than the wider context of the war. And look, to begin with, about how Saudi Arabia could create a crisis for the Russian economy. This is from Business Insider. So 3 main points. Saudi Arabia could flood the market with oil to regain control of prices. This would create a difficult situation for Russia, which is reliant on higher crude prices. One analyst suggests the market could see a repeat of the 2020 oil price war. So the basic concept here is supply and demand. The greater the supply of oil, the lower the price is. What OPEC and OPEC Plus have done, so Russia's part of OPEC Plus, has done to try and to shift oil prices up is restrict the supply onto the global market of oil. And what the US did, partly in a response to this, but partly to keep its own inflation under control, is flood the market with initially strategic reserves from the US. The Biden administration flooded the global market to keep that price down. So not only was Russia not producing much to try and keep the price up, as according to OPEC, so they said, okay, we will not produce as much to try and get prices back up. So they were not producing as much and they weren't getting as much per barrel. So it was a double whammy, and Russia got a bit hit by that. And that was how the US was coping with, or how they were trying to, I guess, fight against the control of the oil price, because US is not part of OPEC. But also it keeps prices down, energy prices are down, oil is down, and that keeps inflation under wraps. Anyway, that's what did happen. Now Saudi Arabia could flood the market to regain control of those prices. So Russia's wartime economy could face a tougher time securing a needed oil revenue if Saudi Arabia tanks the global crude prices. The kingdom has reportedly signalled that crude could drop as low as $50 a barrel if the Organisation of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, does not commit to reducing oil output. In other words, Riyadh is hinting that it could flood the market with supply. Oil supply analysts say this move would slash prices and penalise OPEC members who have not cooperated in reducing oil flows, including Russia. With Russia's already selling its oil at discounted rates and with higher production costs, a low price environment in oil markets may impact its ability to finance its aggression in Ukraine. Luke Cooper, a research fellow at the London School of Economics, wrote for the IPS Journal. Saudi Arabia, the de facto leader of OPEC, has been trying to keep oil prices above $100 per barrel by pushing for member states to cut production. But with international crude hovering around the $80 mark, this hasn't worked. To shift strategy, sources told the Financial Times that Riyadh now plans to turn on its taps by December. Saudi Arabia is fed up. Simon Henderson, director of the Bernstein program on Gulf and energy policy at the Washington Institute, told Business Insider, quote, leadership of OPEC is a multifaceted responsibility. It can work well, but it also is like herding cats, pretty damn impossible, at least some of the time. S&P Global Ratings data counts Russia among the overproducers in OPEC Plus. Now, that's interesting because there were claims that actually Russia was agreeing and cutting supply. It agreed to cut supply. But according to its last available data, Moscow produced 122,000 barrels above its daily quota in July. Iran and Kazakhstan also breached agreed upon thresholds. The Kremlin's dilemma. So Henderson suggested that some coalition members might be doing this to maximize profits. In Russia's case, Moscow is facing pressure to rake in as much as it can as its war in Ukraine has ballooned defense and security spending in 3 years of war. These sectors will collectively account for 40% of all federal expenditures in Russia's next year. Russia's finances, meanwhile, are heavily dependent on oil revenue. A few years ago, gas and oil production made up 35 to 40% of the nation's budget revenue, the country's finance minister said this week. It's for this reason that the West has been so focused on curbing Russian oil profits. Consider the Group of Seven's $60 price cap on Moscow's crude. Though the 2-year initiative has not panned out as hoped, it was considered to be a key in keeping oil supply stable while denying the Kremlin much needed revenue. Russia has been able to circumvent these caps using unregistered shadow tankers, but Riyadh's $50 per barrel threat might be harder to overcome. Things could turn sour if Saudi Arabia's supply dump reignites an oil price war between Russia and the kingdom. Henderson suggests that this could happen, referring to a similar event that occurred in 2020. That year, production cut disagreements prompted both nations to unleash supply, testing who could survive this low price environment longer. In these situations, foreign exchange reserves became essential, which is problematic for Russia. Since invading Ukraine, the country's insurance against low oil prices has dissipated. Russia's National Wealth Fund has nearly halved since the start of the war, and it's no longer able to source Western currencies to diversify its foreign exchange reserves. It remains to be seen whether President Vladimir Putin will want to engage in a price war with Riyadh, given his other more immediate priorities, Henderson said. Predicting the Kremlin's moves is hard, he said, given many unknowns tied to Russia's oil sales. However, some kind of confrontation with Saudi Arabia may be stirring. This week, Russia's Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak said it's unclear whether OPEC should increase oil output at its December meeting, as signalled by Saudi Arabia. If things do take a turn for the worse, Cooper sees a potential price war as bad news for Russia. Quote, unlike Saudi Arabia, its oil is not cheap to extract, making it poorly equipped to deal with low price conditions. This drives a short-term escalatory logic for Russia's war on Ukraine, requiring rapid battlefield successes prior to the emergence of low price oil market conditions. So that's all good news for Ukraine. Potentially, you'd want some kind of price war with Saudi Arabia. You'd want the markets to be flooded, environmental issues notwithstanding, to drive down the price of oil, to make it that Russia is not only having to produce oil at a lower cost, to produce tons of oil at low prices, but also the fact that it's not as cheap for Russia to produce oil, to extract oil. It means that at low cost they make minimal or maybe even a loss, depending on where the price actually sits. So compared to Saudi Arabia that can extract oil at much cheaper rates due to not being under sanction for maintenance, etc., etc. So this is a very interesting situation, and it's going to be fascinating to see what happens there, because you get this intuitive idea that Saudi Arabia possibly more aligned to Russia. They're not. Saudi Arabia going to be aligned to how they make the most money and controlling prices of oil. That fits in line with what Trump plans on doing when he gets in, which is drill, baby, drill. Actually, the US are already doing that at record levels, so I don't think there's going to be a big change there. It's just going to be more of the same. And I guess Trump will claim that, hey, this is my idea and this is all great. But actually, it could be that Saudi Arabia comes to the US's aid in terms of inflation. If anything's going to help get inflation under control, it's going to be flooding the market with more oil. Now, the US has already been trying to do that, but you add in Saudi Arabia to that, and that will have potentially a really big effect. Okay. Now, in Russia, surveys show a lower support for the war. The results have shifted. Now 52% support negotiations, while 36% are in favour of continuing the war. Next time when someone says Ukrainians are tired but Russians are not, show them these results, says Timothy Milovanov. It must be worth mentioning that the Gallup results came out recently to show that actually 52%, I think it was, of Ukrainians want a quicker end to the war. That has to be seen in context, because other Ukrainian surveys have not shown that. And I was just having a discussion with my mate offline, well, actually online, but aside, just about an hour ago, where he was like, oh, Ukrainians want a quick end to the war. It's like, yeah, take that in the context of frustration with the US in terms of supplying aid, frustration that actually if Trump wins, then they're going to be forced to negotiations, and so that all these different things are going to be affecting how people think. But also, actually, other surveys in Ukraine haven't shown that. But anyway, here we see the red line is the interesting one. That's continue fighting the war, and that has been dropping fairly consistently, whereas a move to negotiations has been rising pretty consistently, bar one little dip, or a couple of actually a bit up and down there, but generally moving. The trend is to move upwards there. And just in general, like, I'm just going to run through this. It's not particularly geopolitical news, but in terms of having the argument over who the good guys and bad guys are in this war, it's worth reminding ourselves what Russia have done. This is just a relatively short list, even though it looks fairly long. Fine, I'll play ball, says this person on Twitter. Russia is a bad guy because, 1, they crack down on political dissent with violence and even assassinations. You don't really think all these people are just falling out of windows, right? They criminalise both protests and NGOs and attempt to circumvent the regime's censorship. 2, they brutally suppress media that is critical of the regime. 3, they shot down Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. 4, they invaded Georgia in 2008. 5, they invaded Ukraine in 2014 and 2022. 6, they indiscriminately bombed hospitals and targeted civilians during the Syrian civil war. 7, they've been caught meddling in US and EU elections. 8, and I'd say Brexit elections as well. 8, they've been responsible for some of the most devastating cyber attacks in history. Estonia in 2007, Russia shut down the entire Estonian internet, banking, government websites, etc. NotPetya in 2017 caused billions of dollars of damage globally. This is the hack that shut down Maersk, FedEx, etc. SolarWinds in 2020 impacted tens of thousands of organizations globally, including a large chunk of the US government, although I think there's a lot to do with China as well. 9, Russia frequently threatens the world with nuclear Armageddon, even though they're normally the aggressor. 10, Russia has used chemical weapons multiple times, including in foreign assassination attempts. Alexander Litvinenko, 2006, UK. Sergei Skripal, 2018, UK. Alexei Navalny, 2020, Germany. Their paramilitary groups sow discord globally. Wagner has been active in Syria, Africa, and Ukraine. In Africa, Russia is almost exclusively responsible for the explosion of illicit weapons. 12, they frequently use energy production to blackmail entire countries into ignoring their criminal actions. I could keep going, but if you haven't figured it out by now, you don't want to. I think that's a good start to the list, and I think you could easily double that. I mean, you can talk about all the war crimes during this war, the assassination of POWs that's now empirically over 100, just caught on camera. Right, we're going to move on to other geopolitical topics, starting with the Czech Foreign Minister Jan Lipavsky arriving in Kyiv for an official visit. So that's good news. He's actually just announced that the Czech initiative will continue supplying ammunition, that is. Now, in Germany, the SPD has, Boris Pistorius, the defense minister, who's far, far more popular than Olaf Scholz, has stepped back from running for the leadership in the upcoming election. SPD forced, this is what Thomas Steiner says, the by far most popular politician in Germany to record his hostage video in which he says he will support the hated Scholz. This seals an epic election defeat for the SPD. So the centre-left party will no doubt get a tonking in the next election because Olaf Scholz is not popular, and he's one of these people that's kind of caught between a hard left and a hard right in trying to appeal to those to not have a leak of voters either way, and it's quite a difficult balance to adopt. Sometimes you just got to say, sod it, we're going to go for what we truly believe in, and etc, etc. Just be strong in your convictions. CDU is going to come along as a centre-right party and possibly go into coalition with the Greens again. The Greens seem to be often the coalition partners, but it could be that actually the CDU go into coalition with the SPD, so it's yet to be seen. As far as Ukraine is concerned, I think a change will probably benefit Ukraine if Merz, the guy in charge of the CDU, remains as committed to Ukraine as he seems to have been, and hope that isn't kind of an opposition ploy. The CDU themselves will be beholden somewhat to the right of the AfD, who are pro-Putin, anti-Ukraine, and I hope that the CDU would just go hard on things like immigration. You know, if I'm not considering politics as what I would want in Germany, but as what I would want for Ukraine, and thinking solely about that. So the CDU could go hard on other elements that could appease the right, but stay hard on Ukraine. Now, Berlin's coalition drama, says a Kyiv Independent in an opinion piece. Germany faces a pivotal moment as Trump's re-election forces a reckoning on its leadership role in both Ukraine and Europe. with regard to security. We're not going to read through all its interesting article, but we're going to come into it halfway down. Trump's re-election has thrust Germany into an uncomfortable spotlight, forcing it to reassess its reliance on US leadership. For Ukrainians who have tirelessly campaigned for German military support, the moment feels both urgent and uncertain. Activists continue to demand the delivery of advanced systems like the Taurus missile, which could change the trajectory of the war. Doubt it, but anyway. Yet Germany's hesitancy remains, with many decisions still tied to Washington's lead. The upcoming February elections could mark a decisive shift. Conservatives, currently leading in polls, have signalled stronger support for Ukraine, just as I was saying, including commitments to deliver more military aid if Russia attacks on civilians persist. However, there's a catch. If the SPD joins the next government as a junior coalition partner, its pacifist leanings could again temper Germany's response at a critical juncture. Even within the SPD, opinions are evolving. German Defence Minister Boris Pistorius recently acknowledged that Germany must become ready for war, signalling a potential shift in the party's stance. Yet Scholz's recent phone call with Russian President Putin, criticised by Ukrainian President Zelensky as opening Pandora's box, underscores the precariousness of Germany's position. Trump's return to power has exposed Germany's vulnerabilities and its dependence on American leadership. The collapse of its coalition government is both a symptom and a consequence of these pressures. As economic, political and geopolitical challenges collide, Germany now faces a stark choice: step into a leadership role in supporting Ukraine, or remain reactive, paralysed by internal divisions and external unpredictability. The February elections will be pivotal in determining Germany's future course, while a Conservative-led government could bring renewed vigour to Ukraine's cause. The spectre of continued SPD influence looms large. For Europe, this moment demands bold action, and a departure from past hesitations. For Germany, it's an opportunity to define its legacy, not as a reluctant actor, but a leader shaping a new chapter for Ukraine and Europe. What's interesting now is, the Second World War is but a distant memory, but it holds this cultural position in our kind of collective memory and collective idea of what Europe is. And now we're at a position where Germany could take the lead in European, in driving Europe into an uncertain future that is in a context of a very bellicose regional situation. So there's war going on, and my goodness, the last time we were thinking about war involving Germany, it was a very different situation. But now we have Germany perhaps helping Ukraine and taking the lead on that, where the UK is outside of Europe, of the EU now, and you've got an uncertain France. You've got Emmanuel Macron being very strong rhetorically, but actually having himself a very weak position due to the onset of Rassemblement National successes. Germany is at a very interesting juncture, and it's going to be fascinating to see where they go over the next couple of months. Now, staying on the topic of Germany, Phillips O'Brien says one of the great myths is that European populations are becoming bored with support in Ukraine. As this poll shows, there's little evidence of this. Actually, Trump getting elected and increasing Russian war crimes will probably lead to an increase in support for Ukraine. This is Phillips O'Brien reposting here on Blue Sky, German aid to Ukraine. So that's really cool for German aid, because Phillips O'Brien's a pretty big thinker. Okay, the latest poll results of the German Politbarometer by ZDF offer a mostly encouraging picture. Compared to the October survey, 70% of Germans surveyed are in favour of continuing to supply Ukraine with weapons. That's plus 5%, and 43% of them agreeing that military aid should be increased. Wow. There is a neck-and-neck race when it comes to giving up occupied territories to Russia in return for an end to the war. 45% of Germans surveyed favour Ukraine giving up territory, while 43% believe that Ukraine should continue the fight. PS, a wording change compared to the October survey. Good point there. When asked how they feel about Ukraine now being allowed to use the full range of US arms, correct question would have been how they feel about authorization of the use of ATACMS, etc. on Russian territory. 55% of Germans favour this decision. Only 37% of Germans surveyed were against it. Last but not least, the question is whether people believe that President-elect Trump will be able to negotiate peace between Ukraine and Russia. Here, 71% of Germans surveyed agree that he cannot. Only 24%, mostly pro-Putin parties, believe that he can. Interesting data there from Germany. Now, Polish farmers are planning on partially blocking the Decescalation checkpoint on November the 23rd. Protesters intend to allow buses and cars to pass in both directions but detain trucks. The farmers are against the trade agreement between EU and Mercosur. Now, war in Ukraine is at a quote, decisive stage and the risk of, quote, global conflict, Poland's Donald Tusk says. So the Polish Prime Minister, his comments came in the wake of Russia's attack on Dnipro a day earlier. Now, Edward Hinton Christie says, indeed, Poland has done everything to become an important security provider and to bind the US to its defence through exemplary actions and investments. And this is in response to the EFCI announcing that Poland has done its homework in the areas that matter to Trump. I reported on this yesterday, such as Duda extend the offer of a Poland visit to Trump. So just to remind people that, you know, Poland, as well as Germany being at a critical juncture, Poland are in a position of being incredibly important in defining the direction of Europe and the relationship of Europe with the US with regard to Donald Trump. Okay, a top UK military chief has said that the British Army would be ready to fight tonight after threats from Putin. Don't mess with the sleeping beast. Potentially, I don't know. I wouldn't overestimate UK's ability, although I mean, I think we've got capabilities. Do we have capacities? But anyway, it's good to see that we are saying the right things, at least, again, rhetorically. Here is one of our MPs giving his opinion on Channel 4 News. So this is Tamanjeet Singh Desi, who chairs the Defence Committee, speaking to Christian Guru Murphy here on Channel 4 News.
Use of nuclear weapons.
Well, Christian, I think we would all acknowledge that we live in an increasingly volatile and dangerous world, and that is an issue that has become more and more to the fore, whether it's in terms of Russia's illegal invasion within our continent. We've got now the increased the escalation of deployment of North Korean troops on European soil. We've got increased conflict, whether it's in the Middle East, across the Sahel, other parts of Africa and Asia, and of course we've got the issues and the tensions around the Indo-Pacific. So within that wider context, if we are to provide support to Ukraine, as I've said on the floor of the House since last month, many of us have been saying that we should be obviously giving strong, solid support to Ukraine, our friends and allies, but at the same time, they should not be out there defending themselves with one hand tied behind their backs.
Yeah, but this is a very specific thing.
Not just give them the equipment.
I mean, you know, Storm Shadow is...
And I know Guru Murphy's pushing back there, but it's great to hear our politicians saying, look, they shouldn't have restrictions. We should be allowing the Ukrainians to use the support we give them in the way that they see fit. It should be noted that the French ambassador to Ukraine, in his interview with France Info, said in a polite way that France does not care about what Ukraine does with French weapons. That's the kind of opinion I like. It's like, yeah, tied one hand behind their backs. No, we'll release their hands and you can do what the hell you like with what we give you. Brilliant. The UN urges all parties in the Ukraine conflict to take immediate steps to prevent further escalation, says the UN Secretary General Guterres, his office. Now, this is really frustrating, where the UN looks at the use of the missile the other day, the Russian missile, and then almost like sinks, just absolutely laps up the Russian narrative there, and like, yeah, we've got to do everything we can to prevent further escalation. Well, how about kicking Russia out of the UN Security Council? That's a good bloody start, isn't it? Georgia's protests are now picking up steam. After a slow and rather sad start, the Georgian opposition finally appears to have some life in them, but it's far from clear whether they can succeed. But I'll be interested to see what is going on with Georgia. I haven't seen any videos recently. There was like quite a few protests, and then they all got broken up, and it seems to have picked up again. But yeah, I'm not 100% au fait with exactly what's going on there. Now, Serbia and Russia are working to find a solution for unimpeded gas supplies to Serbia in connection with the new US sanctions against Gazprom Bank, according to Dusan Bajatovic, the CEO of the state-owned company Sprijagas. They hope that the new US administration will have a different approach. Now, what is depressing about this is that it sounds like they hope that the Trump administration will lift sanctions, and that will be thoroughly depressing. Now, moving on to US stuff, Russia's missile launch will not deter our policy toward Ukraine. We will continue to aid Ukraine and put them on the best possible position on the battlefield. That's White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. That's good. That's what we like to hear. This is thoroughly depressing. Tucker Carlson here saying...
The Republican Party, too.
First of all, Tucker Carlson reveals that he tried to set up a meeting between Speaker Mike Johnson and Putin prior to the House vote on Ukraine aid. Quote, I told him, why don't you just check in with Putin? Tucker wanted the Speaker and the House to run major decisions past Putin before voting. As absolutely unacceptable. And then Tucker Carlson tells Glenn Greenwald that the decision to allow Ukraine to use ATACMS missiles to defend itself from Russia's invasion is, quote, the most evil thing I've seen in my lifetime. Are you freaking serious, Tucker Carlson? You terrible, terrible human. The most evil thing is not Russia's invasion and, all the war crimes and the killing of civilians. It's Ukraine using ATACMS to defend itself. That's the most evil thing you've seen? You freaking disgust me, Tucker Carlson. I have absolutely no time for that human being. Yeah.
I think we're watching the most evil thing I've ever seen in my lifetime, which is the lame duck administration leaving the next administration with the world war, with the nuclear conflict, by allowing Ukraine, a proxy state of the United States, to strike within Russia. And I'll just have one editorial comment and then I'm going to let you go. But I think that...
So he thinks Ukraine is a proxy state of the US, and the most evil thing he's seen is the US allowing Ukraine to defend itself.
People in Washington misunderstand Vladimir Putin, and they think he's a monarch with absolute power, which is not true. And Russian politics is complex and it's lively, and Putin is very concerned with his approval rating within Russia. He cannot appear weak. That's a huge threat to him. He feels that, I can confirm. And if he can't hide attacks on him by the United States through Ukraine, either on Moscow or big civilian casualties, I think he will have no choice, in his view, but to launch like a serious response against Ukraine or NATO countries or possibly the United States. So this seems like the most reckless thing that's ever happened in my life.
I hardly have words for it. Let me just...
Am I overstating it, do you think?
No, not even remotely.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Should we just allow people to just invade other countries, commit war crimes, and then just take those nations? Yeah, let's go for it. If that's what you want, Tucker Carlson, go and frickin' live in Moscow. And then another one here. Member of the Russian government's paid influence program, Jill Stein, leader of the Green Party in the US, says it's time to disarm Ukraine to allow Putin to massacre the rest of the country, says Jay in Kyiv. What a filthy bag. Dr. Jill Stein says, after months of devastating Ukrainian losses, it's time to shut down the war NATO never should have provoked. So it's always NATO's fault, never Russia invading. Go and read Putin's own 2020 7,000-word essay on bloody what he thinks about Ukraine and why he's invaded. Now Biden is risking nuclear Armageddon by sending long-range missiles into Russia, end this reckless proxy war before it ends us. I mean, Tucker Carlson, Jill Stein might as well be the same person. Right, Dave Brown here says, current and former NATO officials are struggling to get a read on Matthew Whitaker, Trump's pick for ambassador to NATO, to the alliance, and a foreign policy neophyte. But there's one common refrain, it could have been worse. It's really interesting. So he's completely ready for this position, inexperienced for this position. He has no relevant working experience to be the NATO ambassador. But it's interesting when some people are like, well, looking at some of these other picks, it could have been worse. It could have been Matt Gaetz. I don't know that that's a good way to go to start off your new administration, by putting in people where critics look at that and go, well, I guess it could be worse, to someone who's just a rank amateur in that context. So, yeah, I don't know. Ben Hodges, General Ben Hodges, says, a bad deal for Ukraine is indeed for the US as well as our European allies. Enormous damage to economies due to millions more Ukrainian refugees and continued disruption of grain and energy supplies, lost credibility of the US as an ally, China emboldened, and Trump will be blamed. This is in response to, and this is very important, NATO Secretary General Rutte, Mark Rutte from the Netherlands, a former Prime Minister, is going to meet with Trump in the near future to discuss on how to settle the war between Russia and Ukraine. Rutte will try to convince Trump that a bad deal on Ukraine will hurt him as much as it will hurt Europe. And that's a way to do it. You've got to see it as a zero-sum game, a transactional approach, and that transaction of not helping Ukraine will hurt the US, which will hurt Trump. And Rutte's the right person to do that. So apparently this is one of the reasons why he ended up being the NATO Secretary General, because he had previously stood up to Trump in public at a previous, might have even been a NATO summit. But he stood up publicly to Trump, and Trump actually gave him respect for doing so, and that's why he was thought to be a good choice for that. Right, let's hear a little bit from your man Clinton.
I feel terrible about it because
I feel terrible.
It's
not very loud.
A very important country, and I
One ear.
feel a personal stake because I got them to agree to give up their nuclear weapons, and none of them believe that Russia would have pulled this stunt if Ukraine still had their weapons.
Great bit of candid honesty here from Bill Clinton, on account of the Budapest Memorandum, giving up their nuclear weapons.
So I think what Mr. Putin did was very wrong. And I believe Europe and the United States should continue to support Ukraine.
Yep, agreed.
There may come a time when the Ukrainian government believes that they can think of a peace agreement they could live with. But
that's up to them.
The rest of us should cut and run.
I don't think the rest of us should cut them that deal, should force that deal on them. Absolutely agree with Bill Clinton there, by the way. And just finally, this is Bill Kristol from the Bulwark, quoting the Bulwark. Hegseth sees a choice for Secretary of Defense for the DoD, for the US government, for the Trump administration. Hegseth paid for a settlement in 2020, so he paid someone who lodged a sexual misconduct claim against him immediately after it happened in, I think, 2017. Anyway, Hegseth paid for a settlement in 2020 because his attorney said if the facts about the incident came out, it would endanger his job at Fox. So at the time, he was a Fox News anchor. Well, he's going for Secretary of Defense now. This is slightly more important than Fox News. So Bill Kristol rightly quotes, should the qualifications to serve as Secretary of Defense be more lax than for being a host on Fox and Friends? Should you be held to a higher account? Yep, quite possibly. Then maybe we need to look into this guy's past. And I've talked about him in the military aid video with regard to women in the military, in combat roles specifically. I don't think he's a good choice for the DoD, and he's certainly not pro-Ukrainian. And that is going to be a real challenge for continued support for Ukraine when all these people are getting put in, or some of these people that are being put in place are so deeply anti-Ukrainian. Anyway, that's enough from me. I really appreciate your support. Take care, guys, and I'll speak to you soon.